Have you ever walked through a crowded street with an empty heart and thought, if I disappeared today, would anyone even notice? New York, the city that never sleeps, where people walk fast, talk fast, and often forget each other along the way. That morning, Michael Reynolds, a former CFO who once stood behind billion-dollar deals, wore a heavy black coat, collar turned up against the December cold. As he walked slowly through Union Square, no one noticed him. No one knew he'd written a goodbye letter. No one knew he had just sold his last apartment. No one knew that today marked 3 years since he lost his son, a little boy buried beneath the rubble of a gas explosion. Michael had chosen the spot carefully, the same bench where he used to sit with his son. He had planned it all. Each step he took was a silent goodbye no one could hear. But then, he saw it, a small envelope, taped gently to the bench's armrest. Handwritten, slightly crooked letters. To whoever needs hope today. Michael nearly walked past it, but somehow his hand reached out, opened it. A letter, just a few lines, written in a child's uneven handwriting, but each word felt like it was screaming into the silence of his soul. Today, my mom came home late again. I was sad, but my teacher said, if we write something kind for someone else, God might send it to the person who needs it most. So if you're sad, please read this. Don't disappear. The world needs you. And Michael cried, for the first time in 3 years, right there on a cold stone bench. And in that moment, a man who was ready to leave chose to stay. Don't scroll away, because you won't believe who wrote that letter or what happened next. This is the kind of story that just might change the way you see the world. Michael Reynolds didn't know how long he'd been sitting on that cold stone bench in Union Square, his hands clenched around the crumpled piece of paper, the childlike handwriting etched into his palms. And somehow, deeper into his heart, that letter, so simple, had pierced through the frozen armor he'd built over the past 3 years. A shell made from a funeral with no goodbyes. From sleepless nights haunted by the face of a 7-year-old boy who never came home. From letters he wrote and tore up. From apologies he never got to say. He didn't know how long he cried, only that the last time he had was when he held his son's lifeless body. The letter had stopped him, had pulled him away from the direction of the Brooklyn Bridge. He sat still, looking around, searching. Someone, a sign, a clue. Who had left it? Just a few people passed by. A girl on her phone, a homeless man curled under a threadbare blanket. None of them seemed like the author of that letter. And then, he saw it, a small notebook lying near the base of a tree. The cover was worn, peeling at the edges, and written in blue marker, Aiden's letters. Michael's heart skipped. He picked it up, opened it. Inside were dozens of neatly cut slips of paper, each one a letter, written by hand, for strangers, for someone having a bad day, for the security guard who always smiles, for the man at the bakery who adds extra cheese, and for anyone thinking about giving up. Every word felt like a hug, a soft reminder that someone somewhere still cares. Michael read letter after letter, his heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in years, hope. The last page made him jump to his feet. My name is Aiden Carter. I live at 132A Monroe Street. If you're reading this, I hope you smiled. My mom says a smile is the only gift that doesn't cost money to give. Michael didn't think. He tucked the notebook into his coat and ran down crowded streets, his breath catching in the December air, his heart racing to a rhythm he hadn't heard in years. The rhythm of life. This wasn't a business trip. It wasn't on a schedule. It wasn't planned, but it would become the most important journey of his life. He didn't know who would answer that door, or what he would say, but he knew this. He could not go. And when he finally stood before the weathered door of apartment 132A, he took a long, deep breath. He had no idea that the person who would open it would be the only one in the world, capable of continuing a story he had stopped writing 3 years ago. The door opened after 2 gentle knocks. The woman standing inside looked no older than 30. A faded gray sweater clung to her thin frame. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed exhaustion despite the polite smile she tried to wear. Yes, she said softly, the voice of someone who had learned to stay guarded. Michael clutched the notebook tighter. His heart raced, not from nerves, but from the fear he might not find the words to match what this moment meant. I'm sorry. I'm Michael Reynolds, he said, then extended the worn notebook forward like evidence that needed no explanation. I found this in Union Square. Is your son's name Aiden? The woman froze. Her brown eyes darted to the notebook, then back to his face. And in that brief flicker, he saw something flash across her face. Wariness and fear. He didn't do anything wrong, did he? She asked, her voice cracking. Michael shook his head. No, not at all. He saved me. Truly. Silence filled the space between them. She opened the door wider. I'm Julia, she said. Please come in. The apartment was small, modest but tidy. Worn furniture, a cracked lamp, and one wall covered in crayon drawings. Rainbows, a dog, stick figures holding hands, and letters. Dozens of handwritten notes taped to the wall like a gallery of invisible kindness. Julia poured him a cup of hot tea. As they sat at a small wooden table, Michael saw how tired she looked. Not the kind of tired a nap could fix, the kind earned from surviving. I read Aiden's letter, Michael said. The one that said, for anyone who needs hope today. He paused, trying to steady his voice. I was going to end my life this morning, but your son's words pulled me back. Julia covered her mouth, her eyes welling. I always told Aiden to write a letter when he felt scared or sad. He's got this gentle soul, always worrying about others. But I never imagined his words would actually reach someone. He did more than reach me, Michael whispered, placing the notebook on the table. He gave me a reason to stay. Just then, a bedroom door creaked open. A sleepy little boy poked his head out, brown hair tousled, wearing a dinosaur t-shirt, his eyes still heavy from sleep. Mama, who is that? Julia turned. Aiden, sweetheart, come here. There's someone who wants to say thank you. Aiden shuffled out slowly, eyes scanning the man with cautious curiosity. He grabbed his mother's hand, hesitant but didn't retreat. Michael bent down, resting a hand on his knee. Hi, Aiden. I'm Michael. I found one of your letters this morning. Oh, was it the one I left near the bakery? Aiden asked shyly. Yes, Michael nodded. It was beautiful. It changed everything for me. Aiden tilted his head. Mama says, when you write something kind, it might come back to you someday. Is that true? Michael smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't forced. This time, he said gently, your kindness didn't just come back. It saved a life. The little apartment seemed to grow warmer in that moment. Julia gripped her son's hand tighter. Aiden looked between his mother and Michael, unsure but curious. And Michael knew. This meeting wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, one he hadn't been looking for. But now, he couldn't imagine walking away from. That afternoon, instead of returning to his cold, empty apartment on the 45th floor, Michael Reynolds stayed. He sat quietly in the worn-out living room on 12th Street with Julia and Aiden. No mahogany conference table, no crystal glass of whiskey on the rocks, just a chipped porcelain mug filled with weak tea, and the soft, interrupted hum of a small family who never imagined they'd be hosting someone like him. Julia sat modestly on the edge of her seat. Aiden, now more at ease, was busy scribbling a new letter with his box of crayons. Every letter crooked, messy, but holding something Michael had never seen in a financial report. Pure, unquestioning trust. He glanced around. The paintings on the wall were all hand-drawn. One showed Julia and Aiden holding hands in a park beneath an orange sky. Mom says I should always draw sunrises, not sunsets, Aiden murmured. Michael turned to Julia. You've raised an extraordinary boy. Julia offered a faint smile. I just try to help him believe that good things still exist, even when the world doesn't seem fair. Michael lowered his gaze. Silence wrapped the room like a soft blanket. He thought of the years he had spent chasing mergers, skyscrapers, and cold handshakes. Maybe he was the one who needed to be raised again. As the sun began to dip behind the buildings, Michael stood and reached into his blazer. He pulled out an envelope, unstuck, gently worn. I don't want to overstep, he said softly, but this is a little gift card for books for Aiden, and a letter for him. Julia opened her mouth to politely refuse, but his eyes stopped her. Inside was a simple card, handwritten, his handwriting, no longer as steady as in his billion-dollar contract days, but each word carried weight. Thank you, Aiden. You gave me something no one else could, a reason to stay. Keep writing. You're not just healing yourself, you're healing those who don't know how to speak their pain. Aiden finished reading, looked up, and asked quietly, do you want to write letters with me next week? The question stopped Michael in his tracks. Not because he was busy, but because no one had asked him something so simple, so sincere, in over 20 years. He smiled, voice low. I'd love that. The next morning, as Michael stepped out the door of the little apartment, he felt like he'd left 1,000 pounds behind. What he didn't know was this. As Julia tidied the small gift bag, a folded sheet of paper slipped out. She picked it up. It was a copy of Michael's old will. Near the bottom, one line had been violently crossed out in red ink. "I no longer need this ending." Julia stared at the page, then out the old window, watching him disappear down the street, her eyes filled with something layered and deep. Shock, gratitude, and something more. None of the three of them knew it yet, but life, from this point on, would never return to what it was before. 1 week later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, in a small corner behind the Brooklyn Public Library, a round table sat ready with stacks of paper, a box of pens, and a few floral stamps. Across from Michael Reynolds, the once legendary name in finance, now fumbling gently with stamps using slightly trembling fingers, sat Aiden, calm and focused, writing carefully in blue ink. "Who do you usually write to?" Michael asked, watching the boy work. Aiden didn't look up. He simply shrugged. "Anyone who feels sad. I leave them on train seats, park benches, once even on a city bus." Michael stared at him. A child, barely 9, carrying a heart large enough to hold the invisible pain of strangers. In a world rushing past, filled with noise and numbness, this boy had chosen the quiet rebellion of kindness, with no name, no return address. Today's letter began with a simple line. "If you feel like no one needs you, you're wrong. Because I'm thinking about you. Right now." Michael swallowed hard. He remembered all the times he'd felt exactly that. Unseen, unneeded, forgotten. And somehow, a boy who knew nothing about him had saved him with a letter left on a park bench. He picked up a pen, not to sign a contract, not to deliver a speech, but to write, by hand, for someone out there clinging to the edge of life. "I once believed I had nothing left to give, that it was all over. But today a young boy reminded me, kindness doesn't expire." Aiden tilted his head to peek and grinned. "I think you should write more. Like, every week." Michael nodded, not just to please the boy, but because he was beginning to need these letters, too. They were medicine, handwritten therapy. And then, just a few days later, something miraculous happened. A homeless woman named Marla, living near the Union Square subway, found one of the letters. Security footage later showed her clutching the paper to her chest and weeping. A stranger walking by saw her and stopped to ask if she was okay. That stranger? A local journalist. Within 48 hours, the story exploded. The healing letter found on a New York sidewalk. That was the headline across blogs, newspapers, and even primetime news. People began posting photos of handwritten letters they'd found, tucked into library books, stuck to storefronts, pinned to park benches. No one knew who the writer was, but everyone felt the same thing. Somewhere in this city, someone was quietly loving people with words. Back at home, Julia scrolled through the news story on her phone. Her eyes lit up as she recognized the handwriting in the photo. She turned to Aiden, about to say something. But before she could, he whispered, "I just write the way Mr. Michael taught me. Never let anyone feel invisible." Julia smiled, but her tears betrayed the weight of what she felt. Because she knew, this child wasn't just changing other people. He was doing what society had long forgotten how to do, giving hope. With his hands, with his heart, and with quiet words that refused to be silent. News about the small handwritten letters of hope appeared across New York's major media outlets. Reporters scrambled to uncover the identity of the mystery letter writer. But only a small group, a very small one, knew the truth. Aiden, Julia, and Michael Reynolds, the man who once believed his life had reached rock bottom. One Friday afternoon, Michael received a call from the mayor's office. The secretary's voice was slightly tense. "Mr. Reynolds, are you the person behind the handwritten hope movement?" He froze for a moment, not out of fear, but because that name, handwritten hope, had never been made official. And yet, it had already become a movement. That same day, a photo went viral. A small child sat in a stroller, holding a handwritten letter with wobbly lines. "I can't read, but my mom did, and she smiled." For the first time in months. Michael slowly folded his phone closed, eyes damp. His hands trembled, not from illness, but emotion. He looked out the window, where Brooklyn was beginning to glow in the warm evening light. Julia was sorting stacks of books at the counter. Aiden was writing a new letter, his back hunched, his pen moving in rhythm like a beating heart. Michael stepped outside and stood before the small house Julia had turned into a community bookstore and reading room. And in that moment, he realized this might be the place he needed all along. 3 weeks later, Michael held a surprise press conference at the New York Public Library. Behind him stood a large sign, "The Handwritten Hope Project, Right to Heal." His voice was low and raspy but steady. "I used to believe kindness was a luxury, that it didn't exist in the real world. But a 9-year-old boy and his single mother proved me wrong. Starting today, we're launching a nationwide project where students can write letters to residents in nursing homes, shelters, or hospitals. And we will cover every cost: paper, pens, stamps, and the belief that words still matter." In the audience, Julia held Aiden's hand tightly. He looked up at the stage, eyes shining, not from the lights, but from the gaze of the man he now saw as the father he never had. Days later, special mailboxes were installed in over 300 schools across America. Each one bore a simple label: "Leave a letter, change a heart." Michael was no longer in boardrooms. Instead, he visited schools, spoke to students, and whenever someone seemed unsure, he told the story of the day he almost ended his life, until he found a letter taped to a bench. It wasn't a plea for money or an emergency message. It was just a whisper that someone, even without knowing me, believed I was worth saving. That night, when Michael returned home, he found a small envelope slipped under his door. The handwriting was unmistakable, for when the world feels heavy again. Inside, just one line: "Remember, you matter. Aiden." Michael laughed softly, tears streaming down before he could wipe them. Because no matter how many accolades or named projects came his way, he knew he'd always need that simple reminder. He mattered to someone. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in the heart of spring, Michael sat inside the little bookstore Julia and Aiden now ran. He was no longer the man who once stood atop the world of finance, but a man who had found his heart again, in handwritten letters, and in the eyes of a boy. The bookstore had become more than a shop. It was now a community hub, a place where children wrote letters to the elderly, and seniors found a reason to wait by the mailbox each morning. Twice a week, Julia taught a class called Letters That Heal, and Michael, though he had never taught a day in his life, sat in the back row, taking notes like a man relearning how to be human. One afternoon, as Aiden returned from school, he burst into the store, glowing with excitement. "Mom, Mr. Reynolds, I've been invited to Washington, D.C. Julia blinked. "Wait, what?" Aiden held out an envelope, an official invitation from Youth Voices United, asking Aiden to speak at a memorial honoring lives lost to COVID-19, and the hope rediscovered through the kindness of strangers. Michael read the letter over and over, silent. When he looked up at Julia, there was something in their eyes that went beyond gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement. They had become a family. That day at the Lincoln Memorial, hundreds of chairs faced the podium. Aiden stepped up, wearing a pale blue shirt Michael had picked out, and a cross-dyed navy blue tie that Julia had knotted with care. Before the cameras and the tearful faces, his voice trembled, but it stood steady. "I'm not anyone special. I'm just a kid who didn't get a birthday cake one year. But my mom told me, sometimes you can be the reason someone keeps going, just by leaving a piece of paper, with a few honest words." The crowd held its breath. That day, I left a letter outside our apartment. I didn't know the person who'd find it, was about to give up on life. But instead of ending his story, he started a new chapter. Aiden looked toward the front row, where Michael and Julia sat side by side. He smiled. "And now, I have a dad. Not the one I was born from, but the one who listens, who believes in me, and holds my hand when I need it." The entire audience rose to their feet, not because the speech was flawless, but because its truth was undeniable. That night, back in their small Brooklyn living room, Michael sat between Julia and Aiden. No grand speeches, just the quiet warmth of belonging. Aiden rested his head on Michael's shoulder. Julia poured tea and said softly, "Thank you for staying when you could have left." Michael smiled faintly, squeezing both their hands. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." And in that moment, he realized he wasn't just the man who had found a letter, he was the man chosen by it. A month after Aiden's speech in Washington, life seemed like it might return to normal. But no one expected what came next. A short clip of the boy's words, about the letter that healed, went viral across social media. Over 12 million views in just 2 days. The comments flooded in. "I cried when he said, 'You might be the reason someone keeps going. I was about to end my life, but now I'm writing my first letter. Thank you, Aiden. You saved someone you've never even met.'" Local news picked it up. then national television. They called him the Little Letter Healer. Michael didn't say much, but he took action. He quietly launched the Handwritten Hope Project, a program that encouraged elementary school students to write letters to seniors, nursing home patients, or anyone going through a crisis. Julia was invited to be the national director. Aiden became the campaign's youngest ambassador. And what moved people most? It all began with one anonymous envelope. At a small school in Denver, an 11-year-old girl battling depression received a letter from a student in New York. Just a few words. "I don't know who you are, but if you're feeling sad, I hope you'll write back. We can be friends." She cried. The following week, she wrote back. A month later, she volunteered to become one of the program's Hope Writers. The ripple effect didn't come from fame, but from genuine kindness and the power of being present. One afternoon in Brooklyn, Julia was sorting through a new batch of letters when she opened one from Oregon. "My name is Lily. I'm 10. I'm writing this because my mom cries a lot, and I don't know how to make her happy. I just hope that someone out there, who's been as sad as my mom, will read this and maybe feel a little lighter." Julia went still. She walked over to Michael, who was helping Aiden fold paper airplanes from recycled letters. She handed it to him and said softly, "You should read this." Michael scanned the letter, then looked up. "We've started something bigger than all of us." Julia nodded, eyes glassy. But it still began with one person. One person who stopped. One person who read. One person who believed that a letter could save someone. Michael took her hand, and now thousands of people are doing the same. That night, the three of them sat by the window, watching the city glow under the weight of streetlights and distant sirens. Aiden whispered, "Mr. Michael, I think I want to do this forever." Michael smiled. "I think we already are." And beneath the quiet hum of New York traffic, a small family found their purpose. Not to be known, but to be the reason someone else chooses to stay. That Christmas, Union Square was blanketed in the season's first snowfall. Golden lights wrapped around every tree, while people below exchanged warm coffee cups, wrapped gifts, and wordless hugs. In a quiet corner near the park, the very spot where young Aiden Carter once left a small envelope of hope, a new bronze plaque had been mounted on the wall. The Hope Step, where one letter saved a life. Below it, dozens of handwritten letters fluttered like prayer flags. Every passerby was invited to leave behind a kind word, a message of encouragement for a stranger. And thousands had done just that. That night, inside a modest red brick building just off the square, a small gathering was underway. Julia, dressed in a simple pale blue dress, was chatting with volunteers. Now the national coordinator of the Handwritten Hope program. This wasn't just her job, it was her mission. Aiden, now 10, dashed around reminding guests not to forget to drop their letters into the Send Love Forward box, a special mailbox that would randomly deliver each letter to someone, somewhere, every week. And Michael? He sat quietly by the window, cradling a mug of hot cocoa, his eyes scanning the room, filled with warmth and laughter and life. A kind of peace he hadn't known in over 60 years. Julia joined him, gently resting her head on his shoulder. "Did you ever think a single letter would bring us here?" Michael shook his head and smiled. "I used to think I could control everything, but it turns out the thing that changed my entire life was a handwritten note from a child I had never even met." Just before midnight, Aiden stood in the center of the room, holding up the very first letter he ever wrote. This time, he wasn't nervous. He read aloud with clarity and quiet confidence. "If you're feeling sad, just remember, someone out there still believes you deserve to be loved. If you're feeling lost, write something, because maybe, just maybe, your words could save someone, just like mine saved Mr. Michael." The room fell silent. Julia placed her hand gently on her son's shoulder. Michael stepped forward and wrapped Aiden in an embrace, as if holding both the child he once lost and the part of himself he had just found. Some things don't require money, fame, or power. A letter, a small gesture, a moment of listening. We don't have to be heroes to change someone's life. We just have to show up. Just pause. Just write something kind. If you're listening to this story right now, take a few minutes. Write a letter to a loved one, a friend, or a stranger who might be searching for hope. Because sometimes, the words you write may be the very reason someone chooses to stay. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe that even the smallest kindness can become someone's miracle.